When the doctor asked about my bruises, my daughter said, "She's just clumsy." When the nurse came back alone, I pressed a folded note into her hand. The bruise around my eye had gone from red to purple overnight, and I watched Claire choose her outfit that morning with the focused attention of a woman preparing for a performance. Camel-colored coat, ivory blouse, hair pulled back just loose enough to look effortless. She stood in front of the hallway mirror in my house, in the house that still had Thomas's reading glasses on the nightstand because I could not bring myself to move them, and she smoothed the lapels of that coat with both hands and looked at herself with the particular satisfaction of someone who has decided they are ready. Then she turned to me and smiled. "Ready, Mom? Don't want to be late." I had been sitting in the kitchen chair for 40 minutes, dressed and waiting, because I had learned that being ready before she was ready was the only safe response to her schedule. My coat was on, my hands were folded in my lap. The bruise was visible above my cheekbone in the way that bruises are visible on fair skin in winter light. Unmistakably, embarrassingly visible, Claire wheeled me out to the car. She had decided I needed the wheelchair 3 months ago. My legs are fine. I walked 4 blocks to the library every Tuesday for the last 11 years. Rain and cold and everything. But Claire had decided, and Claire's decisions, once made, had a way of becoming the architecture of my daily life before I understood they were happening. The doctor who saw me at the Elmwood Family Practice Clinic was named Dr. Farid Ansari, 38 years old according to the plaque, 12 years in practice. He looked at his chart when we came in, and then he looked at my face. And the specific quality of his attention when he looked at my face told me he was doing 2 things simultaneously, reading the injury and reading the room. He said, "Mrs. Hayes, can you tell me what happened here?" I opened my mouth. Claire's hand came to rest on my shoulder. Warm, practiced, the hand of a devoted daughter. "She loses her balance constantly," Claire said, already smiling. "I keep telling her not to walk alone, but you know how independent she is." A small, affectionate laugh. I turned my back for 30 seconds. I looked down at my hands. 71 years old, and I had learned that silence was the only language that didn't cost me anything. I need to tell you who I was before I tell you what I became. I was Margaret Hayes, née Carroll, born in 1953 in Albany, New York, the second daughter of a pharmacist and a school librarian. I graduated from the University at Albany in 1975 with a degree in English literature and a minor in French. I taught high school English for 9 years. I raised 2 children and helped Thomas build the import furniture business that let us pay off the mortgage in 1998 and send both kids to college without debt and take a trip to Portugal for our 30th anniversary. Thomas was Thomas Hayes, my husband of 43 years, the kind of man who left notes in the kitchen before work and remembered not just your birthday, but the small things, the things nobody thinks to say out loud. He died on a Tuesday in September, quietly, in his sleep, from a heart that had been failing for 2 years and that he had managed with medication and stubbornness and the particular determination of a man who had too much left to do. I was not prepared. You are never prepared, regardless of how much warning you've received. Our son, Daniel, lives in Portland with his wife and their 2 children. He is a good man with a busy life and a time zone problem. And in the weeks after Thomas died, his calls were regular and then less regular and then weekly, the way grief gets managed at a distance by people who don't know what else to do. Our daughter, Claire, is 44 years old, lives 40 minutes from my house, and showed up on my doorstep 8 days after Thomas's funeral, with 2 suitcases and a speech about how she couldn't possibly let me be alone right now. I was grieving. I was grateful. I was, as I have said, stupid. Not stupid in the way that deserves contempt. Stupid in the way that 71-year-old women who have spent 4 decades trusting the people they love are sometimes stupid in the immediate aftermath of the worst loss of their lives. I took the offered kindness at face value, because accepting it as something else required a clarity I did not have yet. Within 2 weeks, Claire had organized my medications. She had always had a particular relationship with systems, color-coded, timed, efficient. She made a chart. She had the pharmacy switch my prescriptions to a mail order service. She managed the refills. I told myself this was helpful. Within 3 weeks, my phone was gone. She said it was for my safety. I had gotten a call from an unknown number, she said, and she was worried about scams targeting elderly people. She got me a new one, a simpler model, she said, easier to navigate. The new phone had a short list of contacts on it. Claire, Ethan, her husband, Daniel, who had been told I was adjusting well and needed rest, a number for the local pharmacy. Michael Grant's number was not on it. I noticed this. I told myself I was being paranoid. Thomas had given me Michael's number 6 years ago, had made me commit it to memory on a Sunday afternoon in the kitchen of this house, saying, "Just in case, Margaret, just in case," with the gentle seriousness of a man who believed in preparation without wanting to alarm you. I recited it to myself that first night the phone was gone. A phone number reduced to pure sound, to rhythm, like a prayer in a language I was still fluent in. I have said it every night since. Rosa Medina had worked for us for 20 years. She came twice a week, kept the house, knew where everything was kept and how Thomas had liked his tea and which shelf the photo albums were on. She was 63 and had bad knees and a granddaughter. She showed me pictures of every visit without fail. Claire fired her on a Thursday while I was sleeping. I woke up and Rosa wasn't there. And when I asked, Claire said she had let her go because it wasn't necessary to have outside staff when she was here. And besides, she'd read that unfamiliar faces could be disorienting for older people in periods of stress. I am not a person who is disoriented by familiar familiar faces. Rosa's face was as familiar to me as my own kitchen. I said this. Claire said, "I'm just trying to take care of you, Mom." Her voice had a specific texture when she said things like this. Warm on the surface, and below it, something else. The first time I heard it, I chalked it up to grief, to stress, to the genuine difficulty of what she had taken on. The 15th time I heard it, I had stopped finding explanations. My friends stopped reaching out around the 4th week. Not all at once. That would have been easier to see. One by one. Barbara, who had known me since the children were in elementary school, called twice and then stopped. When I asked Claire about it, she said she had explained to Barbara that I needed quiet, that I got confused during long phone calls, that it was better to let me rest. Confused. I was not confused. I have never been confused. I read 3 books a month and do the crossword every morning and could recite the full text of the letter Thomas wrote me on our 20th anniversary from memory if you asked me to right now. Claire was telling people I was fading. I understood by week 6 that she was building something. I could see the architecture of it without being able to name all the pieces yet. The isolation, the medication management, the narrative she was circulating about my deterioration. I understood that these things had a shape, and the shape was not care. Then came the papers. She put them on the kitchen table on a Friday morning with coffee, and the specific gentleness she used when she needed me compliant. Cream-colored documents, dense with legal language, fanned out in a way that was designed to suggest routine. Just some estate planning, Mom. Completely standard. Michael Grant was expensive and slow. I found someone who specializes in senior estate transitions. Just sign where the tabs are. Michael Grant, my attorney, Thomas's attorney, the man whose number I said like a prayer every night. She had offered me a substitute and framed it as efficiency. I looked at the papers. I am not financially naive. Thomas made sure of that. He believed that both people in a marriage should understand every document they signed, every asset they held, every number in the accounts. I had co-managed the household finances for 40 years. I know what a power of attorney looks like. I know what a property transfer form looks like. I signed 4 documents before I understood what I was signing. The paperwork was designed the way certain things are designed, to be skimmed, to put the significant language in the middle of the second page where the eyes don't naturally fall, to make the act of reading carefully feel like an accusation of bad faith. When I picked up the 5th document and read it properly and understood that it was a deed transfer for this house, the house where Thomas and I had lived for 31 years, the house I had promised myself I would stay in until I couldn't anymore, I put the pen down. I said, "I'm not signing this, Claire." The warmth behind her eyes went somewhere else. I cannot describe it better than that. It did not disappear. It relocated, like something switching rooms in a house you thought you knew the layout of. She said, "Mom, it's just a formality for estate purposes." I said, "I understand what it is. I'm not signing it." 3 days later, she pushed me into the kitchen counter. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had asked where my reading glasses were, the ones Thomas had given me with the thin gold frames, and she said she didn't know, and I said she had moved them when she reorganized the counter, and she said she was trying to help, and I was being ungrateful, and it escalated the way these things escalate. Not dramatically, not with the building tension of a scene you can see coming, but suddenly, the way something tips. Her hands came up. She pushed me, hard, both palms flat against my shoulders. I went backward into the edge of the kitchen counter. The corner of it caught me below the shoulder blade on the left side, and the pain of it was immediate and white and total, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. Couldn't breathe, standing in my own kitchen, in the house I had lived in for 31 years. She cried afterward. She held my hands and cried and said she was so sorry, that she was exhausted, that she didn't know what came over her. She said she would do better. She said she loved me. I said it was okay. I said it was okay because the counter had told me something that the previous 6 weeks had been building toward, but not yet stated plainly. The rules had changed. The person I was living with was not my daughter in the way I had understood daughters. Not anymore. Not in this house. Not since Thomas died and the suitcases arrived. The second time was 3 weeks later. I had tried to use the house phone to call Daniel. I had found it in the cabinet where she kept it now. Not on the wall where it had always been, but in the cabinet. Out of reach. Managed. I had dialed Daniel's number and had 2 seconds of ringing before Claire came into the kitchen and took the handset from me. Not grabbed, not snatched, but took, with the calm deliberateness of someone exercising a right they have already decided they have, and placed it back in the cabinet. "You don't need to bother Daniel," she said. "He's busy. I already told him you're doing fine." I said, "Claire," she took my arm. She walked me to the hallway. She was not careful about the doorframe. Ethan, her husband, a man I had known for 14 years, a man who had sat at my table and eaten my food and accepted my Christmas gifts, and called me Margaret in the easy way that good sons-in-law do, stood in the living room doorway and watched. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood there and watched his wife walk me into the doorframe, and his face was the face of a man who had made a decision about what he was willing to see, and the decision was nothing. I understood the rules then, completely, without ambiguity. Eat when told, sleep when told, never argue, never reach for a phone, never use the word push, the word hit, the word hurt to anyone, and every night in the dark, say the number. Say it like a prayer. Say it like Thomas is listening. I waited for 3 weeks for the right moment, and I want you to understand what 3 weeks means when you are waiting in a house you own, managed by a person you raised. It means learning her rhythms the way prisoners learn the schedule of their facility. It means identifying the 20-minute window between her phone calls and Ethan's arrival on Friday evening. things. It means understanding which days she leaves her purse on the kitchen table and which days she takes it to the bedroom. I found a pen. This sounds simple. In a house where the writing implements have been collected and organized and placed out of casual reach, for your own good, Mom, you leave things everywhere. Finding a pen and keeping it is not simple. It took 2 weeks. I found one that had rolled behind the radiator in the guest room, a ballpoint with a cracked barrel but functional, and I put it in the pocket of my winter cardigan, and I never wore that cardigan where she could see me. One morning in the 3rd week, Claire left her purse open on the kitchen table. She had taken a call in the other room and set the bag down and didn't close it, which she never did, which was the first irregularity I had seen in 2 months. I moved slowly. I have learned to perform slowness. It is a very useful performance for a woman whose daughter believes she is declining. I found a receipt in the outer pocket of the bag, a grocery receipt, long enough to write on. I turned it over. I pressed it against the kitchen table, Claire's voice audible from the other room, still on the call, and I wrote Michael Grant's number from memory in my smallest, most careful handwriting, the muscle memory of 40 years of grading papers coming back without asking. I folded the receipt 4 times. I tucked it into my sleeve, inside the cuff of my cardigan, where it sat flat and invisible against my wrist. I went back to the kitchen table and picked up the book I had been allowed to have, and opened it to a page in the middle and sat there reading, or appearing to read, while the folded receipt pressed against the thin skin of my inner wrist, and I felt the specific, private quality of having done something. That was a Thursday. The clinic appointment was the following Tuesday. I carried that receipt in my sleeve for 5 days. Dr. Ansari finished his examination and stepped out to update his notes, which is standard procedure, which Claire knew, which meant she settled back into the chair near the window and pulled out her phone with the body language of someone who has determined that the difficult part of the morning is over. The nurse who came back in was young. I would learn later that her name was Jessica Tran, 26 years old, in her 2nd year at Elmwood. She had the efficient, focused manner of someone who does this work because they mean to, not because it was available. She came in with the blood pressure cuff and the tablet, and she greeted me by name, and she began taking my blood pressure without drama. I heard Claire shift in the chair, the particular shift of someone whose attention is more on their phone than on the room. The note was in my left sleeve. My right arm was extended for the blood pressure cuff. Jessica moved around me to adjust the cuff, and for one moment, less than a second, her hand passed near my left wrist. I pressed the receipt into her palm. I felt her fingers close around it, a single smooth motion. Her face did not change. Not one muscle shifted. She continued reading the blood pressure numbers with the same measured calm she had brought into the room. She looked at the small square of paper in her hand. She looked at me. Mrs. Hayes, she said, her voice the same pleasant, clinical tone it had been since she walked in. Do you feel safe at home? The question was professional, standard, the kind of question that can be asked in front of a family member and explained away as routine, the kind of question designed to give the person being asked a way to answer without the walls closing in. I heard Claire's heels, not the shift of weight from the chair, the actual heels on the hallway floor, just outside the partially open door. She had stepped out, phone call I assumed, or the bathroom, or the particular restlessness of someone who is very confident and therefore does not feel the need to stay in the room. 30 seconds, maybe less. I held Jessica Tran's eyes. No, I said, one word. The door opened. Claire walked back in with the bright, recalibrating smile of someone who has missed something and is pretending they haven't. Sorry, what did I miss? Just checking her blood pressure, Jessica said. Smooth, immediate. The voice of someone who has practiced composure in high-stakes moments and knows how to use it. Her hand closed around the receipt, like a fist. What happened in the next 2 hours, I experienced in fragments, because a person who has been frightened for a long time does not process good news in a straight line. It comes in pieces. You receive each one carefully. The way you handle something you've been told is fragile because you've been waiting so long you don't quite trust that it's real. Jessica spoke to someone. That someone spoke to the clinic administrator. Claire was escorted politely to a consultation room to discuss some paperwork related to my insurance. A fiction delivered with professional grace that Claire accepted because she was certain she had won the morning and certain that I was too diminished to fight back and therefore not paying the kind of attention she should have been paying. A woman came into my room about 20 minutes after Claire left it. She was plain clothes, dark slacks, a gray sweater, the kind of dress that is specifically designed not to communicate anything that would close a conversation before it started. She introduced herself in a quiet, level voice. Patricia Hendricks, Adult Protective Services, County Unit, 14 years in elder abuse investigation and intervention. She sat down in the chair beside my bed, not across from me, beside me, which is a choice I understood, and a deliberate one. She did not open a notebook immediately. She did not rush toward the paperwork. She said, Mrs. Hayes, I'd like to hear what's been happening. Take as much time as you need. Start wherever feels right. I have thought about that instruction many times since. Start wherever feels right. Not start at the beginning, which presupposes a shape. Not tell me what happened, which presupposes I know what to call it. Just start wherever you are. I started in September with Thomas. I told her everything. The suitcases, Rosa, the phone, my friends, the papers at the kitchen table, and the 4 I signed before I understood. The medication changes. She wrote something very specific when I mentioned that. A quick note with a circled word I couldn't read from my angle. The kitchen counter. Ethan in the doorway. The reading glasses with the gold frames that had disappeared and that I had not been allowed to look for. I told her about the pen in the cardigan pocket pocket. I told her about the receipt and Michael Grant's number and the 5 days I carried it in my sleep. Patricia Hendricks did not blink during any of this. Not in the way of someone suppressing a reaction, in the way of someone for whom these details, while serious, are comprehensible, are part of a pattern she has seen before and knows how to address, which was the most clarifying thing about her. Not that she was shocked, that she was not. She wrote for several minutes after I finished. Then she looked up and said, "Do you know a lawyer you trust?" "Michael Grant," I said. "Thomas's attorney. My attorney. I've had his number memorized for 6 years." She reached for her phone. Michael Grant walked through the door of my clinic room 41 minutes later. He is 66 years old, silver-haired, built like a man who was an athlete in his 50s and still carries it in the way he occupies space. He has been Thomas's attorney for 22 years, and mine for 11. He wore his gray overcoat, the one I have seen at every serious occasion where he has appeared in our lives, the one that makes him look like someone you want on your side. He stopped when he saw my face, the eye, the wrist, which had its own story that I had not yet gotten to with Patricia. He looked at me for a moment. He said, "Margaret." His voice was the same as it has always been, steady, certain, without false warmth. "I've already made 2 calls. He sat down. He placed his briefcase on the floor. He opened it and took out a legal pad. He told me what the 2 calls had been. The first, to the bank, where the joint account Thomas and I had maintained for 30 years had, in the past 6 weeks, experienced several transactions he described as irregular, withdrawals he wanted to verify, transfers to an account he couldn't immediately identify. He had been monitoring Thomas's estate accounts as executor, and something had flagged. He had not called me because Claire had told him I was not up for phone conversations. He said that last sentence with the particular precision of a man who wants to be accurate without editorializing, and I understood from his face that the editorializing was present and being restrained. The second call, to a colleague who was a family law attorney and who had handled, in the past several years, a significant number of elder abuse cases. He had given her the outline. She was available. Patricia Hendricks and Michael Grant spoke for 10 minutes in the corner of the room while a second nurse checked my wrist. A nurse who introduced herself as Donna, 3 years at the clinic, who looked at my wrist with the focused attention of someone doing documentation, who took photographs, who wrote in her chart with the careful language of medical record keeping that I understood was also legal record keeping. "Documented bruising consistent with impact against a flat surface," Donna said, not to me but to the chart, with the measured precision that told me this was not the first time she had done this kind of documentation. Exhibit A, I thought. Thomas would have known to call it that. At 2:17 in the afternoon, 2 officers from the county police department arrived at Elmwood Family Practice. I know the time because there was a clock on the wall, and I had been watching it the way you watch things when you are waiting for something you can't quite believe is coming. Detective Renee Coburn, 12 years on the force, currently assigned to the Elder Abuse and Vulnerable Adult Crimes Unit, was a compact woman in her mid-40s, with the unhurried confidence of someone who is very good at her job and has no need to announce it. She sat with me for 25 minutes. She recorded our conversation with a small device she placed on the table with my permission. She asked precise questions and she listened to the answers completely before asking the next one. Her partner, Officer David Park, was in the hallway. In the waiting room, Claire was still filling out insurance forms. I have thought about this many times since. She was still at the desk in the waiting room, pen in hand, performing the devoted daughter for an audience she believed was watching, certain that the clinic was a contained situation she had navigated successfully, certain that I was too diminished and too isolated and too afraid to have done what I had done. She had been so careful. Rosa, the phone, my friends, the papers. The narrative of decline she had been building for 2 months in every conversation with everyone who knew me. She had been careful about all of it. She had not been careful about a pen that rolled behind a radiator. She had not been careful about leaving her purse open on the kitchen table on a Thursday morning. And she had not been careful about Jessica Tran, who had kind eyes and a closed hand and 12 years less experience than Claire expected and 12 times the courage. What followed did not happen all at once. I want to be clear about this because stories like mine are often told as if justice arrives like weather, suddenly, completely, all at once. It does not. It arrives the way most important things arrive, in stages, with paperwork, with waiting, with days that feel like nothing is happening, and then days when several things happen simultaneously. Claire was detained in the waiting room while I was still speaking with Detective Coburn. She was not arrested in that moment. The detective was careful to explain to me the distinction between detention and arrest, between investigation and charge, because she understood, I think, that I needed to know exactly where we were in the process. She did not want me to expect something that wasn't ready to be delivered. But Patricia Hendricks filed an emergency report with Adult Protective Services that afternoon. The report triggered an immediate case review. A temporary emergency protective order was filed the same day by Michael Grant on my behalf, which placed legal restrictions on Claire's access to my home and my finances pending investigation. The bank accounts. Michael had already flagged them with Horizon Trust. The review that followed found that in the 6 weeks since Thomas's estate had moved into the holding phase of probate, several transactions had occurred that were inconsistent with my instructions or with the estate's documentation. Transfers to an account registered to a company with a name I didn't recognize. 3 of those 4 documents I had signed, the ones I hadn't understood, were found to include a general power of attorney and a secondary secondary signatory authorization on the joint account. The fourth document I had signed but not understood had authorized those transactions. The document I had refused to sign, the deed transfer, had not been executed. That refusal, which had cost me the kitchen counter, was also the thing that had protected the house. The medication review came back within 72 hours. Dr. Ansari had flagged it during our appointment without telling Claire. He had noted the prescription inconsistencies when he pulled up my medical file and compared them to what Claire had described as my current regimen. A pharmacist named Dr. Helen Chu, who served as the APS medical consultant for cases like mine, reviewed the full medication history. Her report found that 2 of my medications had been adjusted in dosage without any documented physician authorization. Adjusted in ways that were consistent, she wrote in her report, with producing symptoms of confusion and fatigue in an otherwise healthy patient. Producing symptoms, not managing them, producing them. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Rosa Medina, when contacted by Patricia Hendricks as part of the case investigation, provided a statement that described what she had observed in the final weeks before her termination: changes in my demeanor, my isolation from the phone, my weight loss, and an incident she had witnessed through the kitchen window on her last day of work that she had not felt she was in a position to report at the time. She provided that statement without hesitation. 20 years with our family, and she did not hesitate. I was not surprised. I should call her. I have thought this every day since. The criminal investigation took 4 months. I will not walk through every detail because some of it is still, as of this telling, unresolved in ways that are in the hands of people better equipped than me to resolve them. What I can tell you is that Claire and Ethan were each formally charged. The charges against Claire included financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, physical abuse of a vulnerable adult, and fraudulent misrepresentation in connection with the estate documents. Ethan was charged with failure to report, a charge that carries its own weight in elder abuse cases, and that Detective Coburn explained to me with the careful specificity of someone who wanted me to understand that watching is not the same as innocent. The charges against the attorney who had prepared those documents, a man named Gerald Foss who operated a practice he called Cornerstone Senior Estate Services, and who turned out to have had his license reviewed in 2 other states for similar conduct, were filed separately, referred to the state bar, and are ongoing. I will tell you what happened to me. I went home. Michael Grant arranged it. The protective order was in place. Claire and Ethan were not permitted on the property. Rosa came back the following week, not to work, just to see me, bringing food and the photograph of her granddaughter, who was 6 months older than the last time I'd seen the picture. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. I have not been as grateful for another human being's company since the days after Thomas died, when the house was full of people and I couldn't feel any of it, and I could only feel it now, in a quiet kitchen in January, with Rosa drinking tea across from me, and neither of us needing to explain to the other what the past 3 months had been. Daniel came in February. He flew from Portland and arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and when I opened the door and saw his face, Thomas's eyes, Thomas's jaw, older than I am used to seeing him, and surprised in the way children are surprised when they understand their parents are real, something in my chest unknotted that I had not known was knotted. He stayed for 10 days. He cried twice. I let him. He needed to more than I did, because he had not been here for what I had been managing, and the gap between what he had been told and what had actually happened was something he had to close in real time. In my kitchen, over 10 days of coffee and conversation, and the particular grief of a son who understood that he should have paid more attention and didn't know yet how to forgive himself for it. I told him that Thomas would have told him the same thing he told me. You do what you can with what you know, and when you know better, you do better. He said, "How are you so calm about all of this?" I thought about it. I said, "I had a long time to be frightened. I used it up." In April, 6 months after the Tuesday at Elmwood Family Practice, I went back to the library. Not because it was Tuesday, it was a Thursday, but because it was a warm day, and I wanted to walk 4 blocks and choose books from a shelf without asking anyone's permission. I wore my coat and my reading glasses, which Michael's office had helped me locate. They were in a box in the back of the closet, with other small things that had been moved and collected and managed. The gold frames are slightly bent now, which Thomas would have fixed for me at the kitchen table with his careful hands. I fixed them myself. I walked the 4 blocks. I chose 3 books. I walked back in the afternoon light. I passed the house and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at it. The house Thomas and I had lived in for 31 years. The house I had refused to sign away. The house that had been the floor beneath me through everything. I thought about Thomas making me say a phone number out loud in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. Just in case, his voice quiet and serious in the way it got when something mattered to him. I thought about a pen behind a radiator, a receipt in a cardigan sleeve, a young nurse with kind eyes and a closed hand. I thought about the specific weight of having done something, pressed against my wrist for 5 days. I went inside. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. I opened the first book. My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 71 years old. I have been frightened, and I have been silenced, and I have been underestimated by a person who had every advantage, and who spent it all on a paper kingdom I could not afford to live in anymore. I am still here. Thomas knew I would be. He always did.